Joining me to discuss this, our state of politics, politicians in general. Delighted to have her for the first time, Stella Tsantekidou. I hope I've got that right, a former Labour advisor. And he's like putting on your favourite coat, isn't he? Talk Radio political editor, and it says here author. I don't know why. Peter Cardboard. Thank you. We all have. Both of you, welcome. Stella, let's start with your reaction today to Chris Pincher, his suspension. Was it 8 weeks, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly, yeah.
What's your reaction to that?
Well, I hope he will do the right thing, which is resign, because his constituency needs a new MP. He's not suitable to be an MP. The report, as far as I'm concerned, I read through the report, and there is no doubt that he did what he was accused of doing. So he needs to resign.
Pete, I said in the introduction there, and I think it's really important, right? You talk about Korski, we've said he denied it. You talk about Pincher, there's examples everywhere. Tory MP Rob Roberts lost the whip for lewd texts. Michael Fallon left the cabinet. Dover MP Charlie Elphick, we remember him, went to prison. Andrew Griffiths bombarded a constituent with over 2,000 sexually explicit messages. Why is this so rife? Why is it that people, come home from work today having grafted, they tune into this, and the people that are elected to do a job are living this incredibly wrong, whether it's bullying, whether it's sexual harassment. Yeah. It's not. How has it been allowed to get to this?
So I think it's a number of things. One is the type of people who go into politics, who are often people who are quite egotistical, don't think they can get away with things, people who are good at communicating often, but also very, very much in tune with their own egos, essentially. I think also there is a lack of sanction as well. There's not the same HR system that would be in any sort of other workplace or professional workplace, and people are protected. There's no doubt about that. You have the whip system, for example. Chris Pincher was chief whip. I don't think he should ever have been in that role. It was known, maybe not by everybody, but by a lot of people in politics, that he was someone who was a risky character who had got up to this before. There'd been a complaint previously, and in fact, Boris Johnson had been told about that complaint. He denied that, but he had been, and that was...
And Boris Johnson said, which is ridiculous, Pincher by name and Pincher by nature. I mean, that's our democratically elected Prime Minister basically hanging himself, it seems, by giving somebody a job who was always going to be flawed.
And sort of making a joke about it as well, in that regard, and almost not seeing it as a serious thing, as though sexual harassment, sexual assault, bullying, and those sorts of things aren't an incredibly important thing to stamp out of any workplace.
Stella, this is probably a silly question, is it an old boys' club? Is it an old boys' network, the House of Commons? You were a Labour advisor. What's it like there?
No, it's not. I'm sorry, but it's not. I think there was a time when British politics was an old boys' club, as you say. I don't think that's the case anymore. At the time when I was, I think things started to change. One of the things that was very clear to me was that if I was able, when I was working in Parliament, if I was able to drink more and if I was able to take part in the banter, if you know about football or sports or anything like that, you would be able to socialise better with MPs. But I do not agree that it is an old boys' club, because that would mean that I would have to accept that all of the female members of Parliament and female staffers who are making a difference in the House of Commons are basically invisible and are dominated by men who act like schoolboys. This is not the case. And also for myself, I have been mentored by male MPs and other male political staffers in Parliament, and I think it would be a disservice to the British political class if we put everyone in the same category. They are not all the same.
Completely agree.
Do you think that there's this sort of belief, both of you, that you can get away with it if you're an elected MP? You talked about, it's egotistical, it's almost narcissistic. I mean, if you put a lot of these allegations in the everyday world, people they'd be destroyed. Their lives would be over. Is there a sort of a privileged belief that you can escape censure because you're an MP?
I don't think it's necessarily about being an MP, but that's part of it. But really, it's about the fact that so many people have got away with it for such a long time. But it's across society. It's in many places where there are power dynamics. We've seen it in the media, we've seen it in Hollywood, we see it now in Parliament and politics as well, where you have people who are hanging around. You don't often socialise a lot with your colleagues, but in Parliament there are bars, there's lots of alcohol, there are people hanging around, not really, if you're the Prime Minister you're very busy, but if you're a backbench MP, sometimes you're just hanging around waiting for votes at 10 o'clock, you maybe 3 hours to kill. You can do that in an office doing paperwork, or you can go down to the bar and see your mates.
But this is my argument about footballers. When we hear stories about footballers, you know, oh my God, they earn 200 grand a week and they visit prostitutes, they drink too much, they do this, they do the other. I remember always thinking, well, if you train for just 2 hours, and frankly, not many are super intelligent, I'm not being disrespectful, what are you going to do every afternoon?
Yep.
Is it the same? Is it almost like you're at this place and there's nothing to do? And here's a question for you, Stella. We hear, rightly, complaint after complaint about men, you know, bullying. We'll talk about that in a sec, not just sexual misappropriation. But are there complaints about females? Are there complaints about female MPs? Are there female MPs who bully their staff? Yes, the other day, Jess Phillips was accused of being racist, wasn't she?
I do not think Jess Phillips is racist. I do think there are, as you said, there are. To begin with, I think the tables have turned. I don't think that anyone can get away with anything. People are losing their careers right now over this, which is a very good message for anyone whose behaviour is not up to that standard to look at their behaviour and change it. Yes, of course, there are females who are not behaving in an appropriate way. Men and women are equally capable.
Absolutely.
I do think there is a bigger problem. The vast majority of cases, especially when you're talking about sexual harassment, it is done by men, the vast majority of cases. But if you're talking about bullying more generally, when I started working in Parliament, I was warned of both male and female MPs.
Interesting, Pete.
The interesting thing with the sexual harassment, I totally agree, it's more men, but it's not just against women.
Yep.
It's against young men, gay or straight, whatever. And there are men who, to the world, are presenting themselves as straight. Look at me, I've got a wonderful family at home. And, you know, in the constituency, they're often a very different person, but get a few drinks in them in Parliament. And there are things that happen against young men. I'm talking about people who are 21, 22, just out of university.
Impressionable.
Perhaps. Impressionable. They're starry-eyed. You know, they're perhaps working as a researcher and maybe £25,000 a year. You've got someone who is earning a lot more money, has a lot more prestige and power and role. And a lot of these people, including in the Pincher report, are saying, well, I didn't want to make a complaint because I thought it might jeopardise my career.
And now we're in this is probably something that you both disagree with. Now, quite rightly, we're in a world where it is absolutely right and proper that you come forward. And any of that inappropriate behaviour, be it sexual, be it bullying, has to be reported against men or women. Has it gone too far the other way? Are people who enter Parliament, SPADs, you were both SPADs, advisors, might they blow over? Might they make something more of a complaint to help? I mean, do you understand what I'm trying to say with that?
People are probably cautious, perhaps too cautious, in terms of what they say and do. I know there are people who will make things very clear and say, look, I'm happily in a relationship, but would you like to go for a coffee? Which is a bizarre thing to say to someone. But there are people who will say that just to make very clear.
Were either of you bullied, approached? Did anybody try it on?
Far more bullied in the media than I ever have been in politics.
Be quiet. Sorry, Stella.
I had wonderful bosses, but I was hit on by men my grandfather's age or of other ages as well. I was hit on. It is a done deal. When you're working in Parliament and you are a young woman, even if you're not young, to be fair, if you are just a woman working in Parliament, it's just that if you're younger, you have less connections, you are more vulnerable, you're more innocent and starry-eyed, as you said, Peter. You don't really know what's going on. Of course I was hit on. And if I'm honest with you, the thing I would like is for women to be empowered, to be able to stand up to men when they're working in a powerful environment like Parliament, to be empowered to stand up to these men. Because what I recall, my experience back then was, especially remember one politician in particular who invited me for tea to discuss our common policy interest. I met them through an event in Parliament, and I thought, amazing. I was working with a think tank at the time. I thought, I'm going to invite him to speak at one of my events. And when I showed up at the members' tea room, and we were surrounded by MPs and peers who personally knew me, so I felt very exposed. As soon as I sat down, that politician said to me, "Oh, why did you get into politics? You are so beautiful. You should become an actress or a model. And for him, I'm sure he thought he was paying me a compliment, but I felt humiliated leaving that meeting.
And probably invited you into the tea room to look good in front of his friends or whatever. Really interesting. This is something we're going to talk about in more detail. We're going to talk about bullying, just that whole sort of toxic environment. Because the one thing that's obvious, and we'll talk more after the break, to both of you, is that and we say it almost nightly, Pete, people's respect for politicians is at an all-time low. It's not just the problems we've got in this country. Many people will say, why are we even putting our trust in these people? Their standards of behaviour are appalling.